having been one of the organizers of this conference, I'm glad it's not our 90th conference. I'm not sure it's at this point if it was. But I think we've got a really great program for folks. I should say that tomorrow at the panel entitled Revolutionary Nonviolence in the afternoon is really more of our official opening, because we expect a lot more people coming in later. People are traveling in. A lot more folks will be there. So I'm Joanne Sheehan. I am with War Resisters League in the New England Regional Office and have been there since the early 1980s. I am also co-chair of WRL's 90th anniversary, along with Matt Myers, taking pictures there in the back. One other person I want to introduce is Leslie Kagan, who's been our amazing coordinator. And Leslie's really been amazing at kind of helping get us through. And the other really important person to know is Mark Lance, who's really kind of our host person here. Who does the studies program. So what we're going to do now is just Mark's going to do some kind of orientation and logistics stuff to kind of help us get until tomorrow, and then we'll continue with the program. Mark.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone. It's a real thrill to have this at Georgetown. I just wanted to run through a couple real quick housekeeping measures before we get started. There is a map in your packets. If the map is not sufficient to figure out where anything is, there are many of us who know this place, who can direct you. So you can ask me. These three standing over here are Georgetown volunteers. These two guys back here. Starting tomorrow, Georgetown people will generally be wearing Georgetown shirts. This is not a matter of, pride. It's a matter of identifying us. So you'll be able to pick us out of the crowd and ask us questions about where things are. Just a couple rules that I have to tell you. For the plenary spaces, they're very picky. You're not allowed to have food and drink in the plenary spaces, and we have to leave all the plenaries on time. That's a really important rule. There's groups coming in after us, or there's enormous charges. So don't chat with the wonderful plenary speakers in the room. Go somewhere else. Clear out. And even better than clearing out, ask us if you can help some stuff when you go. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. And finally, after this, there's socializing time. There's a lot of options for that. It's going to be a nice evening out. You can certainly sit outside. For those who are in the dorms, there's common rooms in the dorms. There is, if you go that way, 2 buildings down on the left is the student union, which has a very big area with couches and comfortable stuff. About 4 or 5 buildings down on the right is Epicurean, which is a place on your map that also, among other things, has a bar. And of course, there's a list of places off campus if you want to go further afield, or just ask me. I'll be in the back through the whole thing. But as Joanne said, we'll more tomorrow. But welcome. It's really an extraordinary thrill for me to have all of you here. And thanks for coming. Bye. Yay.
If people who haven't registered, registration will be open afterwards. We've got a lot of information in your packet, so please read that so I don't have to kind of go through it, but breakfast is in the dorms, where the dinners, where meals are, all of that kind of stuff, right? Please do that. We'll have literature out tonight, particularly on Saturday, lots of literature tables. Tomorrow we're going to have folks out here doing that, so there'll be lots of opportunities throughout the weekend. And I think, we've worked really hard to create a program that kind of ties together these common themes that we've identified in War Resisters League. Learn, certainly resist, disarm, restore, and build. And I think that program will reflect that, and not only reflect kind of our history, but really look at where we are, where we're going, and kind of both the challenges and the opportunities that we face. And to do that, we need to have a cultural life as well. And so we have musicians and poets who will be with us throughout the weekend at every plenary and during culture jams, both tomorrow night and the night before, and the night after that.
How are we going to do that?
So I'm really honored to introduce our first singer of the conference, Luci Murphy. Luci and I met at People's Music Network for Songs of Freedom and Struggle so many decades ago we don't remember. I remember her daughter was very young and short at the time, so I know that was a long time ago. Luci is a singer here in DC. She is an organizer as well. Somebody who's going to really brought her music to the movement. So I'm really pleased to have Luci open us up.
And of course, we are all cultural beings. So I will call upon you to sing with me. This is a song from the tradition of the Georgia Sea Islands. It was brought to me by Guy and Candy Carawan, and it has a part in it for everybody to sing, and I'll give that to you. Ain't you got a right? Ain't you got a right? Ain't you got a right to the tree of life? Okay, that's my part, and your part is, I'll sing my part again. Ain't you got a right? 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 Ain't you got a right to the tree of life? To the tree of life. Should I raise that a little bit?
Yeah.
Ain't you got a right? 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 Ain't you got a right to the tree of life? To the tree of life. We come from the distance. We come from the distance. That was really good. It's really
You got it right.
yeah. We come from the distance. Ain't you got it right? We come from the distance. Ain't you got it right? But we got it right. Ain't you got it right? To the tree of life. To the tree of life. Rocky was the road, ain't you got it right? And dangerous the journey, ain't you got it right? But we got it right. Ain't you got it right? To the tree of life. Our life will be sweeter. Ain't you got it right? Our life will be sweeter. Ain't you got
singing this weekend. It kind of our voices, right? All right. So, I am very pleased to introduce the moderator for tonight's panel. Frida Berrigan has been on the board on various committees and on the National Committee of the War Resisters League for a dozen or so years. And she is now, hopefully people read her blog on waging nonviolence. And if you do, you read about this lovely little child she has, Seamus, who also happens to be my grandson. So, this is Frida Berrigan.
Right, I get to call Joanne Sheehan Nana JoJo. I discourage other people from adopting that moniker, but it's fun for me anyway. Welcome everybody to this multi-generational conversation where we begin to tell War Resisters League's history through storytelling. Right? And we all tell stories all the time, right? And certainly as activists, we need to be telling stories. We can't just kind of throw facts and figures at people. So here's a little story to begin. Once upon a time, in fact, not some random time, but 90 years ago, 1923, a small revolution occurred. People who held that war is a failure of the imagination, that it's a crime, that it's never necessary, came together and formed the War Resisters League. And then what happened? Well, of course, they lived happily ever after. And here we are to just say, yay, we lived happily ever after. No, that's not what we're doing here. So we have a great panel of people, 3 people who will be able to tell parts of War Resisters League's story throughout these 90 years. And then we have all of you, right, and the collected stories that sit in this very historic feeling room, right? Kind of feel like Harry Potter in this room with all of you. So we hope to get not just like questions for the panel, but really the stories that our 3 panelists tell will provoke and encourage and challenge you to tell your own stories of War Resisters League. So I had hoped to start with a spectrum exercise that got everybody out of their seats, but we're starting late enough that we're not going to do that. But you know, after this, when we're all socializing, ask people, what did you have that be your little pickup line for the meet and greet afterwards. When did you kind of find War Resisters League? What's your story, right? Because we won't be able to, not everybody will get to tell their stories in this next hour and a half. So I want to invite our 3 panelists up at this point while I introduce them each, and then we'll hear from each of them. So the first person that we'll hear from is Julie Finch, who is the great niece of Jesse Wallace Hume, the founder of War Resisters League. Julie came to her first WRL conference as a baby, much less like Seamus is coming to his first conference as a baby of about a year old. She's a preservationist. She's the co-chair of the Friends of the Gibbons Underground Railroad in New York City. She was part of the group that got it landmarked. She works now at Bone Printers, which is part of South Street Seaport in New York. She's also a member of Coming to the Table, a group that works on truth and reconciliation among the descendants of enslaved people and the persons who enslaved them. She's part of the 15th Street monthly meeting, the Quaker community there, and there she's the co-chair of the Peace Committee. Her late ex-husband, Donald Judd, used to work with Carl Bissinger a long time, War Resisters League person, and an artist, a phenomenal photographer, on art benefit shows that raise money for War Resisters League. Her father was the former chair of War Resisters League. His name was Roy Finch. He was also the editor of Liberation Magazine. And her mother was, of course I wrote this in the car, Margaret Rockwell Finch. So we're very delighted to have Julie here, and she'll be sharing a lot with us. Anecdotes, personal stories, memories, poetry. Randy Kehler is to the right of Julie. He's been actively engaged for the past 40 years in research, writing, organizing, and advocacy regarding a range of public policy issues: energy, land reform, electoral democracy, nuclear disarmament. He's a graduate of Harvard. He spent, while he was well educated there, we think, he also got quite an education in federal prison, where he spent almost 2 years for his refusal to cooperate with the draft during the Vietnam War. He's the co-founder of the Trap Rock Peace Center, the Nuclear Weapons Freeze Campaign, and the Working Group on Electoral Democracy. As a conscientious objector to war, both Randy and his wife, Betsy Horner, for many years have redirected their federal income tax payments. They gave it not to the military, but to other needs. And for that resistance, for that principled stand, the IRS seized their house in Coleraine, Massachusetts. If he looks familiar to you, perhaps because you saw that documentary, which won a lot of awards and was called An Act of Conscience. And that came out in 1994. So that's Randy, and we'll be hearing a lot more. Oh, you've just heard from me, right? You haven't even heard from him yet. We'll be hearing from Randy. Our third panelist is Sachio Ko-yin. Sachio is an organizer in both anarchist and radical pacifist movements. He's contributed to radical theory work in publications and blogs like the Occupy Philly Media. And I want to pronounce this anarchia. Okay, I know there's more than one way to pronounce that word. Anarchia. Sachio and I agree on that. Sachio also comes to us, with the experience of prison. He served 2.5 years in prison in the late 90s for his part in the Minuteman Three Plowshares action. Perhaps I'll talk about that. Sachio has written for the War Resisters League publications, The Nonviolent Activist, which is now WIN magazine, and has served on the board of War Resisters League. So that is our panel, and it's so exciting to be hearing from the three of them. The way we're going to sort of structure this is we'll hear from Julie first. Julie's going to share some stories and memories of her great aunt, some poetry. She's been collecting anecdotes from people whose names are familiar to some of you: Abe Kaufman, Francis Witherspoon, Tracy Mygat. So we'll hear from Julie first. She'll talk for about 20 minutes. And then I'll pose a couple questions that Randy and Sachio will sort of choose their own adventure from, and they'll both talk for about 15 minutes. And then I'll pose more questions that the three of them can answer, and then we'll have some concluding remarks, and then hopefully have plenty of time, or some time, to open it up to all of you. So, Julie, please.
Can you hear me? Yes. I first met my great Aunt Jessie when she came to visit me in the hospital. My mother had come to stay at great Aunt Jessie's and Aunt Evelyn's apartment across the street from St. Vincent's Hospital. So they came to visit me, I presume, the next day, but I was behind a glass wall. I don't remember her. I'm just going to read a few things I've written down. I remember being told a story about Aunt Jessie when I was a little girl. It was during the Second World War. Jessie was in a store looking at china. She picked up a bowl. "Oh, don't buy that," says that says "Made in Japan," said the clerk. "Well, then, that's exactly why I'm going to buy it," said great Aunt Jessie. This story was probably told in the same breath as great Aunt Jessie used to get up and talk from the soapbox in the street about pacifism. Another childhood memory of my handwriting is terrible. Another childhood memory of Jessie occurred during one of our visits to her West 12th Street apartment. My younger sister and I had been put to bed, but naturally we were like, 8 or 9 or 10. But naturally we kept talking in the dark. So Aunt Jessie told us to be quiet, and we were not quiet. So she came in, she turned out the light. She turned out to be a grown-up of supernatural powers. She not only was quietly and consistently firm and her telling us to be quiet, but she enforced it by herself, sitting in the dark for far longer than any normal grown-up would have stood the boredom. She was sitting in the chair, a book was on her lap, her fingers moving back and forth. She was reading in Braille. Wow. We must have given up and gone to sleep. Towards the end of her life, she knew that she was going to get blind, so she learned Braille while she still could. I frequently remember her white cotton gloves washed and hung up to dry on the towel rack in her bathroom, next to the stockings, and her handkerchiefs that were plastered to the tile wall to stay flat. And she loved dark brown suits and dresses with white print on brown background. Up in Maine, where she would come up and spend the summers with my grandmother and my mother and the 3 brothers. In Owl's Head, Maine, on one summer vacation visit with them, and Jessie asked me, or permitted me, to go through her jewelry box. There was a unique smell of sandalwood. Was it the box, or a perfume, or a powder from her necklaces? There was amber, a silver whatever the thing is, a pendulum or something, and a long silver chain, and it had her Phi Beta Kappa key on it. Funny, chalky white beads. This was all old-fashioned, weird jewelry to me. I must have been getting to be a teenager then. Victorian brooches, one with brown hair in it. My mother wrote a note. It was Aunt Lydi's when she was young. It was a Victorian something, mourning thing. She wore hats, tailored ones, pulled down over one eye. Well, those were the 1920s hats. Plain felt, especially to shield from the summer sun, beige, gold, or gray felt. I don't remember earrings or rings. Mostly necklaces or brooches, pins, like her Alpha Omicron Pi fraternity pin that she founded when she was at Barnard. There was a little tiny ruby in it. And then my mother wrote something. I'm going to skip that. She used to sit us on hardback, scratchy, rush-seated antique Hitchcock chairs. That was punishment because I had opened a package and she warned me about Pandora's box. She also told me that once a little girl opened the box and there was black pepper in it. The punishment was to sit there for a certain period of time. She was very disappointed in me. Her trust in me was shaken. She didn't yell at me or hit me, but not moving on that chair was worse. I called my mother up this morning in the train station in New York and asked her for her memory of Aunt Jessie. She said, I was always so impressed that not only was she a leader and a politician, but yet she just loved fun and humor. She loved nothing better than to read amusing poems out loud. She's the one who started tradition in the family of writing a funny poem with a gift. Of course, I lost it on the way here, but one of them started out, here is something for your cot. It's not red something, but it is the yellow of the suffragette. And then she loved to take her breakfast out of doors up in Maine with her egg and sit out in the garden and eat. in the mid-20s, she and great aunt Evelyn went to China, and I was about, my mother was about 3 or 4, and they brought her back a little Chinese girl's outfit. And I remember playing with, it was scary, the little shoes that the women who had bound feet had, and they were this size. I just saw them recently. And in the apartment on 12th Street was a boat, a little model wooden boat of Japanese fishermen with cormorants, and a little Natsuki basket where a mouse would come and go if you shook it. And they had Mexican plates, and so I was surrounded by these things, and I just thought everybody's family had these wonderful things. There's a list from her diary, her aims, and the diaries were in the 30s. Love, zest, security, strength, joy. Write some, market some, set up clippings, school, WRL, SP, Socialist Party. Don't mind interruptions, but, and then so what, go to bed quickly, in bed by 11. Read for pleasure, at least 1 hour daily or 2 hours on Sunday. Library once a week. Lists ahead, skim magazines. Have French and German going. Read Evelyn in Chinese 15 minutes each week. She would get up at 7:30 she would work on her Chinese. Write one of the children, Uncle Hugh. Get up 7:30 sharp, breakfast at 8:10. Write and type 5.5 hours a week and mark it 1.25 hours. I did a term paper when I went to community college, and on Aunt Jessie, I got a terrible grade because my transitions were not good. The introduction was blah, blah, blah. But anyway, I did research in her diaries. On March 4th, 1931, Albert Einstein met with members of the War Resisters League, including Jessie and Evelyn Hewin. They described him as a great and good man and sweet and gentle. He himself, Einstein said, in countries where revolutionary compulsory services does not exist, real pacifists must, in time of peace, publicly declare that they will not take up arms under any circumstances. This, too, is an effective way of announcing one's war resistance. Even if only 2% of these supposed to perform military service should declare something, war resistance and assertiveness, and assert we are not going to fight, the government would be powerless. The War Resisters League enrolled, I can't read this, distributed literature and buttons proclaiming the 2% concept. And then later, they had marches, they had 2,000 marchers, and then later they had 15,000. They would have peace marches every year in the 30s. Thank you. Wow. Okay, time is gone. Tracy McGath described Jessie going on. I love to think of her on our marches, on our parades. The big parades we were safely between wars. She was swinging and singing her way along up Fifth Avenue. Wow, I underlined this in yellow. I can't read this now. Anyway, I'm trying to find the place where it says as the war with Germany got closer, I think it was 1933, Evelyn or Jessie wrote in her diary, Einstein has left us. United Constitution. Aunt Jessie was very influenced by her father, who was Scottish, Samuel Hewan, because he believed in the single tax movement and the work of Henry George. And when she did her doctorate on socialism, she then became a socialist. And her professor that she did her thesis for was this capitalist, a fan of capitalism, Mr. Seligman. And he said that he would not recommend her for any college teaching because she was a socialist. And I had some reference material there that said anarchists and socialists were not given jobs then. And that was like 1915 or something. So then she went and taught English in the public school system. This is typed from Aunt Jessie's autobiography. In March 1915, we started, John Haynes Holmes and Tracy McGatt assisted me in this. We started the Anti-Enlistment League, which lasted until the winter of 1916 and accumulated 3,500 signatures in various parts of the country. As I was a high school teacher at the time and still am, the League, which received more publicity than its importance deserved, was the subject of much hostile comment in the Brooklyn papers. I was an active socialist also and always talked against the war in speeches that I made. This activity caused me to be summoned before superintendents and boards of examiners several times. The general surveillance and excitement lasting through the war and after. They at first asked me to stop public speaking, saying that I might be brought up on charges, but I declined to do so and kept on actively with the various peace societies that began to be formed. I joined the Fellowship of Reconciliation at its formation in 1916, I believe, the Women's Peace Party, etc., being on the executive board of each. When the U.S. entered the war, I ceased, this is the First World War, I ceased collection of signatures for the Anti-Enlistment League and tried to secure the formation of a no conscription fellowship here, after the model of that in England. I was overruled by other pacifists, however. She's very rebellious. I ran for Secretary of State on the socialist ticket of New York in 1918 and the Lieutenant Governor in 1920. I want to say that she helped her father with his campaign when he ran for office as a single taxer. During the war, I declined to buy Liberty bonds or work for the Red Cross, but was not dismissed from the school system. Although just before the armistice, I was warned that I must go out, would be fired. Very soon. I am still, in 1926, prohibited from promotion to a higher position, the school system, because of this record. After the war, I continued endeavoring to push the matter of personal refusal to take part in war in the various peace groups. With the help of others, Howell, Richards, Nevin, Sayre, Paul Jones, Women's Peace Society, Women's Peace Union, etc., etc. I have an hour and a half's worth of material. I finally succeeded in organizing the War Resisters League, a branch of the War Resisters International movement, in which I am now keenly interested. During the war, Mr. Archibald Stevenson, something or other, did something or other activity against the pacifists and listed me among his 50 in 1919 when the Lusk bills were enforced in New York. I was summoned before Mr. Stevenson's committee and I was refused the certificate of character and loyalty required of teachers because I would not sign the pledge of obedience without reserving matters of conscience. That's the end of the last page that I found. I think it's time for the poems, right? Yeah. I am sorry, I'm eliminating remarks by A. Kaufman, Francis Witherspoon, Tracy McKenna, and I'm coming to the poems. First, I'm going to read a poem written by my sister Marta Finch. Despite the treaties formed between two wars that sought to end all strife, all global intrigue, and fed up with how countries settled scores, Aunt Jessie formed the War Resisters League. My mother often left me in her care with my big sister. Oh, how we delighted when Milne and Lear and Carroll filled the air, their poems come to life as she recited. In those days, nearly every child was spanked with regularity. My aunt said, "Poop." Holding universal nonviolence sacrosanct, she had her inner voice to listen to. One summer day, we sisters got into a row. Perhaps one fancied hearing a verse again, the other not. I've long forgotten now. But clear as yesterday is what came then. Ignoring tales of who'd done what to whom, she sat us in two chairs, placed far apart, forbid us both to speak, then left the room. We held our tongues, but she knew her own art. One glance, then more. Pantomime followed after, using a silly age-old sibling schism where stares turned into whispers, then to laughter. She schooled two little girls in pacifism. And those are the scratchy chicks. So I'm reading her poem, The Gunsmiths and the Armor Trust by Jessie Wallace Hewin. More apologies to Lewis Carroll. The gunsmith and the armor trust were walking on the shore. They wept like anything to see the nations all at war. But if they keep it up, they said, our stocks will surely soar. Oh, workers, will you shoot with us? The gunsmith did beseech. The gentlemanly exercise, it pays as well to each. And since we love neutrality, we'll give a gun to each. 1,000,000 men from east and west came running with a bound. We must defend our land, they said. So many thieves are around. And this was odd, for none of them possessed a foot of ground. A pretext old, the gunsmith told, but pretty sure to suit. A flag insulted may afford or new commercial route. So if you're ready, workers dear, let us begin to shoot. But not at them, the East declared, turning a little blue. After such friendship, that would be a dismal thing to do. Now be prepared, the gunsmith said, before they fire on you. And wait a bit, the West replied, before we shoot our brothers, for some of them have wives at home, and all of them have mothers. Now hustle, said the armor trust, they're awful brutes, those others. I weep for you, the gunsmith said, I deeply sympathize. With sobs and tears he sorted out shells of the largest size. With a Red Cross subscription list he wiped his streaming eyes. Now, workers, said the armor trust, you've nobly fought and fled. Should we go home to celebrate? But not a word was said. And this was hardly odd because all of them were dead.
Thank you so much, Julie, and I hope that at some point during the weekend we'll have an opportunity to hear more of those stories. I think we can all read the history of War Resisters League and Scott Bennett's books and the other books that are out there. The library's full of books, but it's quite another thing to hear about the woman and the context in which she lived, and I'm really grateful for you bringing her very much into our midst. And perhaps the socialists on Saturday at the wiffle ball game could call themselves the Jessies. What would that be? Maybe the anarchists could be the Sachios. You guys will have to fight out who gets to name them. Or you can reject that idea completely, as you probably will. So now we're going to hear from Randy and Sachio. And what I'd like to do is just sort of pose the questions that came to me that I would love to hear them sort of address. but then they can talk about whatever they want. So the questions that I posed, and I did this ahead of time to them by email, was, what was your first knowledge of, experience of the War Resisters League? What war, what resistance, what moment? So just kind of tell us the story of what was happening when you found the league, and how did you first get involved? What was the road that you followed into the league? And who within War Resisters League inspired or grounded your activism? Who was part of your radicalization? So you've heard a little bit about Randy, you've heard a little bit about Sachio. And now you'll get to hear from each of them, and they'll just come up one by one, and I won't interject in between the two of them. So please, Randy.
Great to see everybody. Thanks for coming to this conference and listening to us tonight. And look forward to many conversations with as many people as possible during the weekend. So let me, my really active time with War Resisters League is but a short piece of time. And it really spans from 67 at most to 75, but especially in the 67 to 70 period, it was absolutely the most intense, life-changing part of my whole life. And there's absolutely no question about that. I was 23 years old in 67. But let me start by saying, in answer to one of Frida's questions, I first heard about the War Resisters League in a peculiar way. I'll try to make this very brief. The summer of 1963, after my freshman year at Harvard, I grew up, by the way, in Scarsdale, New York, affluent suburb you're all familiar with, which I used to not even admit I was from. And I came to Harlem in the office of the Congress of Racial Equality to get on a bus to go to the March on Washington. Now, how a kid who grew up in Scarsdale, went to Exeter Academy for 2 years, and then Harvard happened to be doing it, is a whole other story, but I did. And I got on the bus, and it was midnight, and we were heading to Washington exactly 50 years ago this month. And there was one seat left next to this old guy, and as soon as I got down and sat next to him, he turned on the overhead light and handed me this book and said, opened to a page, said, "Read this." I thought, oh my God. So I was reading it, and it was I think it was 1963 WRL calendar. And he said, so he just said, "Read this." So I was reading a tired guy named Max Sandin, who some of you may remember or have heard of, who was born in Tsarist Russia, who refused to fight in the Tsar's armies. His mother always told him that killing was wrong. So he finally had to flee Russia. He ended up, Russia, and he ended up in the United States. And of course, then soon after he got here, World War II was on, and he refused to fight. And he's one of those who got actually a life sentence. There were a few who even got, I'm told, a death sentence, but they were all commuted after the war. So this guy Max Sandin, then he went on to refuse to pay the income tax, which was put in place shortly after that, and then he was a war tax resistor, and they kept garnishing his wages, and he couldn't find employment, and they would seize this asset and that asset, and finally World War II he kept it up, but he was too old to be drafted, and so they harassed him in other ways. And I'm reading this whole thing, and I'm thinking, this is a time I never heard the word pacifism or nonviolence. So I'm looking over here, I hand it back to him, and he says, turning out the light, "I am Max Sandin." Whoa! So he and I talked most of the night all the way to Washington. And he was having a lot of trouble walking, so I was sort of his human cane all through the March on Washington. The bus ride back, we talked again and again and again. Max introduced me not only to the War Resisters League, but to nonviolence, pacifism, and peace work. So that's my beginning, which is amazing. Beginning, very lucky it could happen. Skip now ahead to 1967, fall of 67. I was out at Stanford University in the School of Education. I wanted to be an elementary school teacher in the inner city, and but I really, what I really wanted to do was work full-time against the war. I joined a seminar at the Mid-Peninsula Free University on Gandhian nonviolence, which something said to me that might be useful for me to know about or something. Happened to be taught by one of, I think, a man who was a WRL national field organizer in the, somebody who knows better than I, 40s, 50s probably, Roy Kepler, and Ira Sandpearl, and Joan Baez. And there they were, and so first thing I know, they say, by the way, we're having a demonstration, that's fall of 67, stop the draft week, and if anyone in the seminar would like to come and just witness, we're going to be doing nonviolent civil disobedience, you'll see how it works. And so very timidly I went. I was really quite frightened by the whole prospect of getting arrested, so I decided I wouldn't get arrested. But of course I did get arrested because I couldn't resist. The whole thing was so completely different from anything I'd ever witnessed. So disciplined, so joyous, so full of resolve and active nonviolence. So I spent 10 days in prison with about 300 people outside of Oakland. It was at that time that Roy Kepler walked up to me during our 10 days and said, "How would you like to come to work for the War Resisters League?" And I guess I had forgotten about who printed Max Sundin's calendar, because I remember saying to him, "The what?" What? And I said, "What is the War Resisters League?" And he told me. And then, so I immediately dropped out of Stanford, went to work for the War Resisters League West office in San Francisco, and worked there until I was imprisoned for draft resistance in early 1970. And we had a great gang of WRL people. We called them staff people, but almost nobody was paid. There was at least a dozen of us. I don't know if Mandy Carter's here yet somewhere, but Mandy was one of them. And is Mandy here?
Yeah, she's on her way.
Okay. And anyway, it was a wild, crazy time in San Francisco. And, we would have demonstrations, and we'd have free music from the Jefferson Airplane, and all the big bands of the day. And we were all facing arrest constantly, and being arrested and going to jail for short terms. And then we draft resistors were picked out one by one, selective prosecution, and sent off to prison. We had demonstrations, vigils, walks. We had a great thing called the Light and Sound Show. It was multiple slides showing, like this on a screen in an auditorium, and hard rock music, and candles were lit, and somebody brought homemade baked bread. I mean, it was the whole San Francisco hippie scene. And we would be talking about nonviolence and anti-war activity and so forth and so on, and went to high schools and colleges, and it was a big deal. So it's also where we got involved with military resistors. You may have heard of the Presidio Mutiny, the Presidio Army Base in San Francisco, which is a feature part of the film, if you haven't seen it. Yes Sir, No Sir, about military resistance during the Vietnam War. We were deeply in the War Resistance Office was deeply involved in helping those men, setting it up, organizing stuff, and it was just incredible. It's also where I came into contact with the idea of war tax resistance. When one of the World War II, my World War II mentors, of which I had several who were incredible inspirations for my life, said, I see you're paying the phone bill for War Resisters League, and there's a little tax on it, 10% actually, that goes straight to the war. And I said, no, I didn't know that. He said, well, think about this. You're refusing to give your body to the war, so you think you should give your money to the war? Click. So, as Frida mentioned, my wife Betsy Corner and I have been war tax resistors ever since '76 when we first had a taxable income. And all that came from the War Resisters League back then. So, anyway, my life has changed radically. Nonviolence, which, you know, in the words of tomorrow's plenary, revolution and nonviolence, I understood from the beginning, or I was made to understand, or helped to understand, that it is, by definition, not revolutionary. You don't even have to say it that way, except that you do, because people think of it in a different sort of way. But, and that has always been my life philosophy. I've not only continued to be a war tax resistor, I give talks in schools and in colleges in Western New England where I live, which I call promoting active nonviolence. So I've been the organizer of one sort or another ever since those days with WRL West. It's been, I mean, so you can see what impact on my life those few years in the 60s. In the 70s, I was very, very pleased. Well, actually, in 69, well, in 68, I went to the first national conference. Where's David? I saw him. Was it in Golden, Colorado? Yeah. And then I met Dave McReynolds, and Ralph Tejia, and Igal Rodenko, and that whole cast of characters from New York. And it just felt great. I didn't know anything about war resistors league around the country, and there were people there from everywhere. And it was that feeling for the first time when you think, wow, I'm part of something much larger than I thought. And then in 1969, there was the first War Resistors International Triennial Conference ever to be held in this country, Haverford College. And then, you know, they had people like Martin Niemöller there, and the Vietnamese Vo Van Ai, and Merle Solomon from England, and Michael Randall, and Jean Van Leer, thank you. And just incredible people from around the world. And I once again thought, this is even bigger than a national thing. This is incredible. I felt so supported. And that's the conference that, of course, Dan Ellsberg came to, and when he realized that there were young men of draft age going off to prison, said to himself, if I were willing to risk imprisonment, what might I do? And of course, he ended up turning in the Pentagon Papers. And that's that whole other story. So I was also privileged to be on the WRI Council during the early first half of the 70s, went to 2 more triennials after that, and just met amazing, wonderful people, some of whom remain my dear friends to this day, including some of you here. So I will just conclude by saying that one of the questions that Frida put to us was to reflect on the questions of gender, race, class, and sexuality in those days, and what was it like in terms of those issues at the War Resistors League. This was the War Resistors League West primarily. And I have to say that I don't have a really clear memory in terms of specifics, but my impression was then, and is still, that however much we were still part of the culture of patriarchy, and especially we men, of course, there was still a fair amount of that, but that WRL people in general, I really felt then, and I feel now, were at least ahead of the curve in trying to figure out what is the feminist movement about, what is patriarchy, how are we implicated in that, you know, how does racism fit into what we're doing, and the whole question of, you know, homosexuality and gender choices. And it was just beginning, so I don't want to make it sound like it was perfect by any means. It wasn't. There was still, especially in the wider anti-war movement in the San Francisco Bay Area, not so much in WRL, there was a lot of macho male sexism, you know, leaders saying, resistance leaders saying, you know, to young men on college campuses, who's got the balls to resist? Have you got the balls to resist? And that kind of thing, which always threw me off. There were meetings totally dominated by long-winded male organizers whenever we would, you know, have regional meetings. You know, the speakers at big events often used to be mostly male. And that's the way it was. But I do feel that WRL really was trying to move in a different direction and had people in it who were not only more diverse than some of the other groups, but who really were making an issue out of that and treating it with importance. So I guess that's all I can say about that, for whatever it's worth. So thank you.
For my own story with War Resisters League, which I think gives some sense of moving into further along the history spectrum into the 90s. I was born in '72. It was an unusual family. My father already was planning on writing these books about Confucianism reforming the world. My grandfather on my mother's side was an ardent Freemason as well as democratic socialist, and my mother converted to anarchism, so I kind of grew up with a lot of radical values in the beginning. My mother sprung me from school when I was in 6th grade, so I was just left to teach myself, and so I did. So I read a lot of books, fell in love with philosophy, encountered radical philosophy, but never encountered activism, really, until around 1990. And 1990 was the build-up for Gulf War I. And in our local, in northern New Jersey, in Teaneck, suddenly out of the woodwork were coming all these people with these signs marching up and down the street. And there was this giant moment of starting with just driving by and honking the horn at them in support, and then actually going and showing up, completely nervous, never having done this. And that felt like the beginning of an era, the feeling of actually holding a sign and chanting chants down the street for everyone to drive by. So as that happened, in that whole new world, I gradually started meeting some people who were more kindred spirits. If this small group of people were not yet identified as radical pacifist, inclinations were that soon probably we all would be. At that time, I met my comrade Melissa, and she and I were encountering anarchists in New York City for the first time, which was thrilling for us, except for us, anarchism and nonviolence were so inseparable. In New York City, the anarchists were so, I would say, very antagonistic to the word pacifist. It made them jump, like, don't say that word, please. At the same time, in New Jersey, people who identified with nonviolence, it felt so reformist, so Democrat, so not Republican wars, maybe Democrat wars. So Melissa said to me, why don't you go and talk to people at the War Resisters League if you're so frustrated? They were founded by socialists and anarchists. And this was amazing to me, that there was a whole organization devoted to nonviolence, made up of socialists and anarchists. So Melissa had gone 2 years earlier, before she met me, to the War Resisters League organizers training. This was a major part of her radicalization. Before that, she never had any encounter with activism. So she sent me to the next organizers training. And that was where I got this book, The Organizer's Manual. And this book was such a new beginning. It felt as if there was just this sense I had from the organizers training and this book, that organizing is something that you do. And if you learn to do it in perhaps the right way, and at perhaps the right time, and in the right place, the social revolution might be sparked. So, not long after, we started our own War Resisters League local in New Jersey, made up of this cast of characters I was mentioning earlier, and we called ourselves the Root and Branch Collective. We kind of existed alongside the Quaker Meeting House, and I'd say very much we had our own local culture. I think in the process of this coming into War Resisters League, there was both a sense of the radical nature of local characters trying to embrace revolutionary nonviolence in a local area. And at the same time, we went into New York City for the first time to the War Resisters League National Conference. and we saw this amazing encounter of the national, so long, what's wrong with me? The National Committee, synthesizing all the different proposals by a synthesis committee. We thought this was the most incredible act of direct democracy we ever saw in our lives. So there was a sense of trying to bring this spirit back to our local chapter, a sense of trying to learn how to do consensus and direct democracy, and as well as being more and more steeped, not only in the older anarchist history that we were already steeped in, but in War Resisters League history. Meeting David McReynolds after reading about his work, and reading about Liberation magazine, and meeting people who were part of Liberation. There was a sense that we had missed all the action. But at the same time, at our particular moment in the 90s, I would say, in terms of where we're moving to now, as advanced capitalism moves further and further into the Facebook age. At that point, I'm remembering how in '91, Bob Weiss, who was part of our group, had us start by starting out with looking at the World Wide Web when it first came on. Most of us were totally out of the loop, but he turned it on, the modem, just as it was available to everyone, and it was a moment of, this is very bad, this is the spectacle, but at the same time, can we use this? And so we were totally divided about that. It's just remarkable remembering that moment of looking at web pages so skeptically. Now here we are at the Facebook age, where the entire world is the Facebook age. Another thing that I remember at that time, as our local chapter grappled with issues of anti-oppression, we had a coffee house which happened once a month, where we would deal with different issues, different weapon systems, different forms of social oppression, as well as war tax resistance. And I remember we had deep conversations about social oppression at that time, and went to the Great March on Washington that was for lesbian, gay, and bi liberation. And we had a sign from our local chapter, a big, beautiful banner we made that said, "Fight homophobia at home, not wars abroad." And it was so exciting for us as a local chapter to see that somehow that particular picture got reproduced 1 billion times all over the place, somehow capturing a particular moment, perhaps where there was a sense that social oppressions are inseparable from the work of nonviolence. I would say too that remembering at this time, it was kind of like a golden age for all of us, I think. Traveling to Corey, Massachusetts, where Randy and Betsy's home had been seized. For them, I mean, I imagine it was just tremendous, so much heartbreak involved. For you, for us as young pacifists going there, it was the most exciting thing we ever saw in our lives. Every time we went there, waves of new people doing civil disobedience and new temporary structures being built up like a village, and whole incredible infrastructures of direct democracy, organs of direct democracy, just springing everywhere. It was, for us, probably the most inspirational thing we ever encountered in our various travels. And we tried so hard to bring that back to our local community with the Root and Branch Collective. So, as that moved, myself, I ended up doing a plowshares action in '98, where I did a 2.5-year prison sentence. I want to say that my first arrest ever was in Korean. My first arrest, I was in jail for 2 weeks, fasting the whole time. So that was quite a beginning. Thank you for the beginning.
I'll speak to you afterwards.
But in my 2.5-year prison sentence, during that time, the Root and Branch became very largely of a kind of support committee for the plowshares action. And it felt as if after that, we scattered. We tended to move to other places. But we started something after that called the Root and Branch Alumni Association, which we did with Frida. And basically what we did at that point was keep in touch with each other, because it seemed as if all of our roots as activists were in the Root and Branch Collective, in that War Resisters League logo. And Adam Weissman, people from New York City, I'm sure know Adam Weissman. He came to our root and branch when he was 14 years old, a 14-year-old serious ultra-vegan. Can't even describe the, like he would almost yell at us if we walked on the grass. It was, so seeing him move from that dour, super serious ultra-vegan of 14 years old to one of the founders of the Berrigans in New York City and seeing him on the front page of the New York Post has been joyful. There's a number of cases of people who started with us who have gone on to other projects through the years. One woman, Lynn Knutson, went on to start a peace pagoda. But in the course of this, when Occupy happened, that was astounding. And for the Root and Branch Alumni Association, we found ourselves just all sharing our Occupy stories at the moment of its happening. And this is something that I feel like for all of us, we've never encountered. In Occupy Philly, I was very involved with Occupy Philly. And it was not just activists. So in the very beginning, I described the excitement of being an activist for the first time. I think with Occupy Philly, I had a sense that the activists lost their place. Suddenly, everyone was doing direct democracy, and the old line activists who bottom-lined everything suddenly felt kind of left out. There was a whole change of guards in a really beautiful way. We had meetings at McDonald's, which some people might say is horrifying, but in other words, is a sign of something completely new. So with Occupy Philly, at least in Philadelphia, again, the division between nonviolence and not nonviolence was difficult, because I felt so strongly as if there was a kind of generation gap, where younger, up-and-coming activists often, I would say, had very different understandings of nonviolence. On the one hand, nonviolence means rock the boat, but don't rock it too far. Not nonviolence, is almost a reaction against that, assuming that nonviolence is not revolutionary. So at Occupy Philly, so many discussions about how nonviolence is not holding a sign. It is. But it's also when all the workers go out on strike. It's also when all the unions are part of the struggle, when all the students go out on strike, and when this country becomes ungovernable. And I think that this, I feel like this is something, I can talk more about it later, but I do a lot of soul searching about how I feel as if this is there's time for renewal of this satyagraha idea, of this nonviolent revolutionary notion. Not necessarily of nonviolence as in, I like Clinton, I like Gandhi. So I think in terms of this long War Resisters League struggle and journey and identity, struggles with what pacifism means in the current era, I'm so happy to be here and happy to be part of this panel. And so thank you, and I'll say a few more words when we talk about where we want to go.
So Randy sort of touched on the second set of questions already, but we'll sort of pose the second set of questions, give Julie, then Randy, and Sachio an opportunity to answer them or have concluding remarks as we're sort of winding down this panel. So I'll just pose the two questions and then we'll hear from each of them. And then if there's time, we'll open it up. And we may not have time because I was told by Mark that we need to not finish the panel at 9 o'clock, but be like out of this room, everybody out of this room by 9 o'clock. So
no, we have to be out of there by 9:30, but we have to clean up the room and break it down.
Okay.
So we should.
So we need to finish at 9.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have that. Yeah.
So you can discuss as you fold chairs and stuff. Some of us are very good at that kind of thing. Others of us just sort of stand holding a chair and talking. You know that you're that person. Go do it on the side. Anyway, so two more questions for our panel. And as I said, people have touched on this already. How has your understanding of, application of, practice of revolutionary nonviolence changed throughout your life as an activist? And how do you see that concept or philosophy or sort of tenet moving forward? That's one question. And the second question, gender, race, class, sexuality. What were, and Randy touched on this, what were the dynamics within and around War Resisters League with regard to these issues when you got involved in the League? How did you see them change throughout your time with the organization, and how were you a part of that change? So we'll, as I said, hear from Randy again, and if you felt like you sort of covered those things, feel free to wrap it up for us. I'm sorry, we'll hear from Julie first, and then Randy, and then Sachio.
Aunt Jessie did a thing that some of us in the succeeding generations might have considered her as an Aunt Thomas, because she was a woman who stayed in the background. She called herself the secretary of the War Resisters League, and she had, I have a copy of like a masthead. She had all these men. All these men were the director, the president, the treasurer, the blah, 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 vice president or whatever, and then this huge advisory council, and I can't even read my yellow underlining in the light, so I'm not going to read from the things that I brought, but Abe Kaufman was writing letters to Michael Young when he was working on the history of the War Resisters League in the early years, and Abe would say, you know, some of these guys, they didn't even come to the executive committee meetings more than once a year, or I'm exaggerating, twice a year, but they were there on the masthead because she felt she wasn't going against suffragettes, suffragists, the women, but she did say she did not want the women's peace movement to be just ignored because it was just one of these women crank issues. She wanted it to be something that was respected, that had guts, and that people listened to. And so she hid behind these men. She actually ran the War Resisters League out of her apartment on 12th Street, and Abe talks about that. And I did find one little thing in her diary where she said in May of 1920, I already forgot, 21. Or 23 maybe, she took the War Resisters League pledge cards to the printer, and she was it. The first question was so long.
About revolutionary nonviolence.
Wow. Well, I've been in Occupy, and I've been a Quaker. I've gone back to my Quaker roots and actually become a member. So my favorite moment recently was when I was in the Women in Black Vigil on Thursdays in New York City, 5:30 to 6:30 in Union Square, against the occupation of Israel. And I was mostly in the Women in Black Vigil on Wednesdays, which was against war. I did that for 7 years. And we were pretty silent that Thursday, and it was scary because there was a group of people. I think at one point they were across the street, but I think they were closer. They were in front of us. And I just thought, okay, I'm just going to close my eyes and go into silence. And when I opened my eyes, the police had moved a screaming bunch of people a block away. So that's my own personal mini experience. I think I'm going to end on that and let other people look at my things. I do believe that the truth and reconciliation work that we are doing at Come to the Table, where, I'm going to keep talking in a minute, where I admit that my great-great-great-great-grandfather, quote-unquote, owned enslaved people. And I have been meeting in small groups of people through Coming to the Table with people descended from enslaved people And I broken this incredible denial, liberal guilt, really? That kind of thing. I've done genealogy. My mother is a great genealogist. I've done research. I've found names of enslaved people in family memoirs. And we feel that that is the way to deal with racism, to deal with it right in here in our own lives. And I also am doing genealogy, looking. It takes a little courage to find the linked descendants, the very light enslaved person, and realizing one morning at 6:30, oh my God, she was very light because my fourth great grandfather probably raped her mother. So we are all related. So we call it peace, one cousin at a time.
I think I won't try to say more on the, the race, class, gender, sexuality issue than I said before about those early days, except that I'm sure that we're all still evolving. This is not a finished matter, and it probably never will be. But just free associating as I was thinking about what to say here this last few minutes, I wanted to say a couple things that came to mind at random just now about nonviolence, which is to say, my own understanding of it, as I always say when I talk to youth groups about it, students, is absolutely still evolving. And I assume it will continue to evolve. I think I, went from seeing it as being nice, to a clear ethical standards that Quakers and other peace churches take, to seeing that it has to do with, how you sit down in a demonstration and you don't fight back and you cover your head, and the tactical sorts of thing, to actually begin to think about it in larger terms. In recent years, through my own experience in so many nonviolent and not nonviolent demonstrations and actions, I really, really see it primarily not in ethical terms, although it does suit me ethically and my core values, but in terms of effectiveness and practicality. I heard Joan Baez give an interview recently about the 50th anniversary, the summer of the March on Washington, and one of the questions was, so what is it about nonviolence that has had you advocating this, all through your career? And she looked straight in the camera and without a moment of hesitation, she said, it's just the only thing that makes sense. And I think as I've evolved, a lot of people have evolved, and I think we're all aware of the fact that the consciousness and understanding and practice of, call it revolutionary nonviolence, active nonviolence, is so much greater, I think, and more widespread than it was when, 50 years ago, at least in this country, that despite all the very depressing things that we could talk about that are going on in the world today, to me that is a singular cause for some hopefulness that it affects me that way. Lastly, I just want to say, what also just sprung into my mind was, one of the things I realized at being in prison for 2 years during the Vietnam War was, I felt more allegiance with and solidarity with and kinship with my fellow prisoners who were rebelling against the prison regime violently and with great negative consequences for themselves and usually for the rest of us, than I felt with those who were talking nonviolence but not resisting. And I still feel that way about people all over the world. As much as I feel nonviolence is our only hope, as Joan says, it's the only thing that makes sense, it is revolutionary, my heart feels connected to the people who simply speak out, who resist, who rebel, whether through violence or nonviolence.
Mr. Train, Andy and Sachio. Okay. So, my thoughts about this. Just one more quick note about my life, because it relates to how I'm thinking about all these things a great deal. One thing is that I had been from age 19, when I jumped into the anti-war movement, until about 94, I'd been an organizer. And there was sort of a feeling of eternal crisis, keeping dying organizations alive, starting things that may not start, and jumping from one crisis to the next. The New York Times seemed to be the dictator of where the movement went. So I actually had a kind of family crisis right around that time, and dropped out from all of activism to deal with my family. And it was incredible for me. It was almost liberating to actually know that I couldn't do a little bit of organizing, so I had to do no organizing. And incredibly, I found out later that all these demonstrations were going on, and I never even noticed in Philadelphia. Whole anti-war marches happened, and I actually didn't know. And then when I started to slowly find my way back into it, I was always amazed. It was the same people doing the same thing. Oh my gosh, there you are again. And for them, no time had passed at all. But for me, I felt as if I'd, 50 years, 100 years had passed, and the same people doing the same work. But I started thinking a lot about activism as a subculture. And that's not a bad thing, because obviously that's infrastructure. But in terms of Occupy Philly, and one of the crises that happen in Occupy Philly is the same crisis that happens in every citywide coalition in Philly that I've been part of, is there's always mass mobilizations through the city, and then suddenly there's a moment of panic. The room is full predominantly of white middle class people. Oh my God, quick, scramble, invite the people of color. And that happens every single time. So I think what I'm trying to do more, and thinking about nonviolence as well as activism, is I don't know if I'm going to find my way back into identifying with organizing again. But what I do want to do is when I was an organizer, I always felt eerie about academics and researchers. There's a sense of, there's almost a labor theory of value of activism. It's the nuts and bolts of industry. I think now I'm trying to find my way 2 blocks away from where the activism is happening, and find ways to translate what activism is happening. So part of, in the old Root and Branch days, we had a chess club as part of the Root and Branch, where it was the only place where we got to talk theory. And it was called the BKCS. It has a long story to it. But I think I'm starting to revive this with some people, and we're going to do only theory work. And part of what we're doing is theory not in this extremely kind of self-indulgent, ultra-postmodernist way. I mean to say theory work to see how can we get the nuts and bolts of critical geography. Just to look at a map of Philadelphia and see so vividly where the socioeconomic power structures are. And to see how time and again in citywide coalitions, the people with more time and resources are the ones to get things going and organize within their same networks, and bring people directly or indirectly or 3 times removed from their same socioeconomic and ethnic backgrounds into the movement and then panic. Part of what I'm trying to do is learn self-taught. Remember, I'm not an academic. I'm trying to teach myself to be a social scientist, to be a political scientist, and be a radical political scientist. And in my work with anarchist people of color, we're doing a lot of critical geography stuff. But slowly, my thoughts about nonviolence is, for me, I'm trying to translate for myself history, the interdiscipline of history, economics, sociology, and see how can we start to do, just as one example, crucially, as radicals, as people of extreme radical commitments, how do we neither speak to the faceless public, which we generally, I think, historically don't do very well, or speak to activist subculture, which we do very well. Both of those are good. I'm not saying that people should stop doing anything they're doing, but the crucial thing is to develop a style away from activism where we can address family, address co-workers, address community members, and work on these issues at a remove from the self-coherent cultures that reproduce themselves. For the most part, when Occupy Philly was happening, that was a moment, I felt, where activism was transcended. I mean, people who had never been part of activism in their lives were suddenly part of spokes councils. You know, these mass direct democracy processes, and doing civil disobedience. But the same thing, I was also part of Occupy, which is the People of Color Working Group, and it was all the same reproduction of class and race privilege within activism happened again and again with no one's clear intention. But I think what I want to do in terms of thinking about nonviolence differently is certainly that. But to see how can we enter public debate. So, for example, we're starting in Philadelphia a debate crew, and this is specifically within anarchism, but it's related to all of this. But we want to debate with liberals and conservatives, and not debate with other activists. And what our main goal is to locate time and time again, where are the public forums of general debate happening? So in the root and branch phase, one of the best things I thought we ever did, was go to something called Junior Congress, which was this group for all these school kids, where everyone across the political spectrum lined up their tables and chairs and sold their ideology, and all the students could go and see. That became a model for me of what I want to try working on. There are so many examples of this happening all the time. In the Facebook age, the spectacle, here we are in the Facebook age, there are whole forums where half the people are saying things that would horrify you, but they're forums of free exchange. For the most part, the activists are not there. You know, the radicals are not there. It's basically, we're working on trying to find our way to where general debate is happening, to start to have these discussions in ways that I feel like I was never able to in the past. I think through the root and branch, we were able to find a way where we reached such a state of purity and insularity. I think that was powerful and good. And I want to be back there in many, many ways. But, you know, how can that take place in very different forms? So anyway, so it comes down to basically our chess society. I want to try to make something like a policy institute, that's a radical policy institute that tries to develop these things. I know these ideas might sound all, you know, having been done to death in the past, but to me, it's completely new. So the last thing is nonviolence in our age has to be completely reinvented, because I think we know this, we all know this. Occupy happened, and Occupy was nonviolence. And it was incredible act of total non-cooperation out of nowhere. But in terms of discussion, I think that this conference is crucial to try to see how can these reclaiming of what satyagraha is. I mean, in the independence movement of India, you know, it was a sense of making, by everyone praying in the streets, making the country ungovernable in the face of evil and justice. So this is the work ahead of us in the Facebook age, in the age of advanced capitalism, where everything we do seems to be metabolized by the market and sold back to us. This is where we're at, and this is what we must do. So.
Very good.
So while I have everybody's attention, before we spin out a little bit, Leslie passed me a note with a couple of reminders about tomorrow. So the first session is at 9:15 in the Lorfink. Is that the thing? Lorfink? The Lorfink Auditorium in the Marari building?
Hariri.
Hariri.
Is in the
Right, okay. So there's a map in your packet, shows where it is, or ask, as Mark said, all the Georgetown people will be wearing very stylish t-shirts. You can ask them. If you're staying in the dorm, there's going to be a light breakfast in the 5th floor common room at 7:30, okay? So just that little bit of housekeeping out of the way. Chance encounters that change lives. That's what we heard here today. Occupy Coleraine, occupy Betsy and Randy's house, to occupy New York City, to occupy Philadelphia. A War Resisters League organizer's manual that looks like it has been put through its paces. Well used.
You just ripped that cover off.
Need some duct tape. WRL gatherings and meetings and celebrations and bus rides and marches, songs and poetry and time in prison. Felt hats and brown print dresses, a diary of aims and intentions and plans that I felt like I should scrawl all down and try and emulate. A life of learning, right? From learning Chinese to learning Braille, to preparing for blindness and embracing old age in a really beautiful way. A memory of revolutionary nonviolence played out beautifully as a disciplining of oneself as a child. I thought that was really lovely. A WRL calendar as a way of introducing oneself to a young activist. I thought that was very bold move. I didn't know Max, but like, wow, yeah, read this. Sunny. But he got you, didn't he? So these stories, these fragments, these bits of 3 lives, of hundreds of lives. We heard so many names and so many people sort of touched throughout this hour and a half. So we have a sense, we have a taste. I have a taste of WRL's 90-year history, of these rich moments, these very sort of peak times, and then, as Sachio said, these times when we felt like we had missed everything, and yet that being a real golden age, right? A real time of reinvention and discovery. So I have a confession to make, which is I have no idea what to do with the next 6 minutes in terms of opening it up to all of you. I honestly don't know what to do, because I would love to start hearing from people, and yet I also don't want to, just be watching the clock the entire time and be like, oh, no, once I open it up. So unless I hear something from like Joanne or Leslie, I think I would like to just close it and to get us out of this room sooner and into a place where we can begin to really share with one another. I've seen some nods, so can we consent to that? All right. Right on.
I block consensus.
So thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists, to Randy, to Julie,
Well, maybe we can have one song. Well, I was going to say we can have a song.
We do not have to move the chairs. We have to move it like the sound system, and we'll tell you what to move. Don't move the chairs.
I think that we should use that time to have one more song from Luci Murphy. Yes. One more song from Luci Murphy.
Joanne asked me about my daughter, and this is a song that she wrote. It's a choral song. It can be found on YouTube. If anyone wants to get the link, just give me your email and I'll send it to you. Oh, yes, we can. For we struggle so hard to mend this world that we live in. Oh, yes, we can. Oh, yes, we can. For we struggle so hard to mend this world that we live in. Oh, yes, we can. We struggle so hard to get to the end that's so far away, and we often can't seem to make the change for that better day. Will we ever reach the top? Should we never give up or stop? Can we continue to stay and fight, going on with no end in sight? Oh, yes, we can. For we struggle so hard to mend this world that we live in. Oh, yes, we can. Now the time will one day come, for some it already has, when a job will be well done and good made out of bad. When the one who feels the joy will want of it to share, and will turn to a friend to let them know they care, and they'll say, oh, yes, we can. For we struggle so hard to mend this world that we live in. Oh, yes, we can. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, we can. For we struggle so hard to mend this world that we live in. Oh, yes, we can. One more time. Oh, yes, we can. For we struggle so hard to mend this world that we live in. Oh, yes, we can.
All right, and this is just the beginning.
Yeah.
Thank you.